So I've had many requests from students to make a video on how I make sauerkraut, and here it finally is. I know I said I was going to do it a long time ago, but I guess better late than never. So a couple things. The reason I make sauerkraut is because it's full of healthy probiotics, which means it's full of bacteria that's good for your stomach and your gut, for digestion and mental health and all sorts of stuff. That's why people eat things like yogurt. Now, I don't like yogurt. It grosses me out, so I make sauerkraut. When you go to the store though and buy sauerkraut off of a shelf, if it contains vinegar, which most sauerkraut does, it's not gonna have any kind of probiotic benefits because the vinegar kills it. The same is true of pickles. Brands like Bubby's are made with natural fermentation and have no vinegar. You'll buy them in the refrigerator section. But that doesn't mean that if you find sauerkraut in the refrigerator section that it's full of probiotics. Again, check the ingredient list. Make sure there's no vinegar in there because the vinegar will kill the probiotics. And it's kind of expensive though, which is why I make sauerkraut myself. So this is a fairly long video. I want to say at the beginning of this that I am not a cooking expert. I'm not a health expert. I'm not a probiotic expert. So if you choose to make this, I just did the best I can, and this is how I make it. I'm sure there are way more videos out there made by professionals who do a much better job. But without further ado, here is the video. In front of you, I have all of the main ingredients you need. The main ingredients are cabbage, salt, ideally some sort of like coarse kosher salt or sea salt. Do not use regular iodized salt. You definitely need a scale. I like to use caraway seeds, mustard seeds, garlic. You should have some airlocks if you can, but you don't necessarily need them. You need some sort of glass containers to store them in while they ferment, and a large container, and obviously a sharp knife to cut everything up. So here we go on how to actually start making your own sauerkraut. Okay, so the first step is to remove the dirty outer leaves. When I do this, I like to have kind of a garbage bowl where I toss things that we don't want to include. So that's probably about good for this one. And you're gonna do this for all the cabbage. And you're also, once you've kind of removed the outer leaves, you're gonna wanna save a couple big leaves for later. So I'll save this one for later. And I'll save one more for later. You're gonna put this basically on top of all the chopped cabbage to kind of keep everything down while it ferments. So that's step one, prep the cabbage. Okay, so I removed the outer leaves of all the lettuce, and again, I've reserved some of those leaves as well. There might be some dark spots that don't look so great. You could just kind of cut them off and then not include them. So the next step, we have to get rid of these stems in the middle. So what I like to do is just kind of cut in a little bit and then turn it and then cut in, and basically cutting a square. And be very careful with this. And then you can kind of just pull out the stem. The next step, you want to cut the cabbage in half, and oftentimes I'll quarter it, so then I'll cut it in half one more time. And if you see that there's more of the stem here, sometimes I'll kind of trim that out to make sure we're not getting too much stem. And basically just do that for all of your cabbage. If this is your first time making sauerkraut, I would not make this much. I might stick to just one cabbage or maybe even two, just to see if you like it and see if you like the process, because it is pretty time consuming. So do this prep for all your cabbage, and then you'll be ready to start cutting it up. This next step is one of the most important, if not the most important steps. And that's to figure out how much salt you're gonna need. And so what you need is 2% salt by weight. So what you need to do is weigh the amount of cabbage you're cutting up, and then basically determine what 2% would be for salt. So I'm gonna put this giant bowl on the scale. I'm gonna zero it out. You can't really see that, but it says it's 0. So now anything I add, it'll only weigh what I'm adding in here. So I'm gonna place all of the cabbage that I've quartered into here to figure out exactly what the total weight of the cabbage is gonna be. And the total weight is 4,220 grams. 4,220 grams. I like to either take a picture of that or write it down so that I could do the math and figure out how much salt that will require. So that ends up totaling about 85 grams of salt. So I'm gonna place my bowl here. I'm gonna press the tare button, which means it'll zero it out. And I'm gonna put in 85 grams of pink Himalayan salt, which is quite a lot, okay? Right at about 85 grams, so we're good to go. So the next step is that we have to finely chop up our cabbage, and as we kind of fill up this large container over here, I like to kind of salt it a little bit as we go. What the salt's gonna do is it's gonna draw out all the moisture, and it's gonna also help preserve and kind of start that fermentation process of the cabbage. So I'll put this to the side, and I'm gonna move my containers. So here's the container. I like a stock pot like this because it's easier to kind of like keep everything contained. You could just use a bowl. I like something that's metal, but you could use a glass bowl. Doesn't really matter. The key with the container has got to be large enough to kind of contain everything at first. So to start with, you're going to grab one of your quarters of cabbage. You're going to put it on its side, and what you want to do is you want to have pretty fine shreds of cabbage that are about equally sized, because that means that it will ferment at a similar pace. So be careful, watch your fingers. If you're not good at chopping things, maybe just don't do this project. And you're gonna do this for all the cabbage, and it will take quite a while. When you get down here, I like to kind of flip it and turn it over and finish the end like this. And again, be careful. And just dump this cabbage in, kind of spread it out a little bit. If you have a large piece, you could always toss it in the trash container. But do this for all the cabbage, and like I said, it will take quite a while. So at this point, I've chopped up maybe a third of the cabbage, and I like to start the salting process. So I'll take about a third of the salt and just kind of get a good sprinkle in there, and just make sure that the salt comes in contact with the cabbage. I kind of break up any larger chunks, and again, toss these large chunks. But basically you want to get the salt in contact with as much of the cabbage as you can before you continue, and basically follow the same process. So cut up another third of the cabbage and then salt that third. So I'll kind of leave this part alone and then just kind of salt this area. And then at the very end, you're ready to start mashing it up and getting the moisture out of the cabbage and preparing the fermentation. So this next step is the most work-intensive part, and it does take the longest of the process. So I've chopped up all my cabbage, everything, the salt has been kind of distributed, and now you want to basically just kind of massage the salt into it. And the reason, again, I like this style of container, like just a big stock pot, is that it has these walls, so it's kind of easier to get in there. So you're going to do this for a while, and then you're going to kind of want to mash the cabbage down, and it's going to squeeze the moisture out. You could do this with your hand. I have a stainless steel mallet, which does speed up the time. I wouldn't recommend buying one of these unless you are kind of serious about making sauerkraut, but I just basically mash things up, move it, rotate it, try to pull from the bottom. And you're going to do this for quite a while, 10, 15 minutes. Then I like to let it sit and do it for another 10 or 15 minutes. I'll usually do about 3 sessions. After the first or second session, I'll add those seeds and the garlic. But right now, it's all about just kind of drawing that moisture out of the cabbage. And again, this is a pretty time-intensive process. You'll see that the moisture is already kind of starting to come out of it. And by the time you're done, the cabbage will be much lower in the container as all that moisture is pulled out and it kind of gets condensed more. So at this point, I've already done a couple rounds of kind of just mashing up the cabbage, and you can see if I squeeze it, some moisture comes out. If you move this over, there's some liquid in the bottom. We still need to go further with that. But at this point, I'm going to add about 2 teaspoons of mustard seed and 2 teaspoons of caraway seed. And again, those for about 5 cabbage. And then a couple cloves of garlic that I've minced. And I'm going to mix this in by hand, so it's kind of spread out evenly. And then I'm going to continue to just mash, pull, and just kind of continue to do this for another probably 10-15 minutes. I might take one more break to let the salt soak in a little bit more, and then do one final batch of it until there's a lot of moisture pulled out, because you're gonna wanna put these, this cabbage in jars and then have liquid covering the top to allow it to be fermenting without any air getting into the actual cabbage, which protects it and makes it safe. So you gotta keep at this for quite a while. Like I said, there's a lot of work involved with this, but the results are pretty good. So at this point, a lot of the liquid has been pulled out. If you look to the bottom, there's a bunch of liquid down there. If I squeeze it, it kind of drips out of there. So we're pretty much ready to put this into jars. And what I like to do is kind of evenly split it between two larger jars. If you're doing less, you could use a smaller mason jar. I have this like canning funnel that just makes it a little bit less messy. And what I'll do is basically fill it up. As high as I can. And then I'll punch it down and try to really like condense the cabbage as low as I can, and then move on to fill up the other half, and then kind of just go back and forth until both have roughly equal amounts. And as you push it down, you'll see liquid kind of coming up as well. You really want as little air as possible in those little nooks and crannies. So we're almost done. Mostly we just have liquid, and we'll pour any of this remaining liquid on top so that, again, there's a layer of liquid above all the cabbage after we've kind of pushed it down further. So at this point, you can see that there is a lot of liquid there. So the next step is to put the large cabbage leaves on top to prevent any of the loose cabbage from kind of getting above that liquid layer. So this kind of acts as a barrier, keeping all of the cabbage in. And then what you might want to do is put some weights in there. I usually use little espresso coffee mugs and just kind of push it down and then make sure the leaves stay down in there. Anything that's glass or, not reactive is a good thing for this. I kind of just push everything down, make sure the liquid layer's up there. And that should be good. Okay, so now you're ready to cap this off and put on the airlock so that it will allow air to get out but no air to get in, which will prevent anything from kind of getting moldy or funky in there. So these are the airlocks. I filled them up about halfway full of water. Because as this ferments, it's going to release air, and you're going to see the liquid's going to flow up, and it's going to, so if you fill these up too high, it actually could overflow, which is why you're better off filling up the container 2/3 of the way or halfway rather than all the way up to the top. So this right now, this is in good shape, and it is now ready to ferment for the next couple of weeks. So the sauerkraut is done. If you look on the side, you'll see some bubbles from the fermentation process. All you have to do really is remove the top leaves, which are kind of gross. If there's any mold on the top parts, you're okay. Basically remove anything that's kind of nasty. And what I like to do is add some saltwater solution on top with 2% salt by weight with filtered water. It gives the sauerkraut a brinier flavor and it just kind of tastes good. And also replace this top with a normal lid and you're basically done. So this is what it looks like. It's kind of dried out a little bit. I probably could have done a better job getting more liquid out of the cabbage at the beginning of the process, but I like that briny, almost like olive or pickle taste. So that's why I add, again, some of my own salt water using the same exact salt that I used before. And again, just filtered water, 2%, and you're good to go. I just like to kind of cover up the sauerkraut as well as I can. That should be good. And it's done.